evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Toby Eunice of a Gypsy Kiss. Stick with us a couple of seconds, and we're going to tell you how we think technology is going to help you find this treasure. Hey guys, thanks for joining us tonight. We think we've got a really good show, really interesting show, and perhaps even a thought-provoking show. I'm going to start out by having our panelists introduce themselves, and I've actually asked only two people to be on the panel with us tonight, Matt Brewer and my son Jason Eunice, because they're both in the areas that they deal with the technologies that I want to be able to discuss tonight, and they can both be very informative. And I've got some questions I want to ask them, but I also have some questions I want to ask the room. Let's start by Matt. Introduce yourself, and I don't know if you have any online assets, but tell us about your business.
Yeah, so I just started a online business where I do drone surveys and such. It's called Brewer Aerial Services LLC, and I've been a treasure hunter for the last couple of years, specifically for the Fenn treasure. And before that, I was in information security for years and years and years, and so that's where my background in technology comes into play.
So just out of curiosity, you guys, are you seeing us on? Okay, I wasn't getting the screen. Jason Michael, thank you, Matt.
I'm Jason Eunice. I'm Toby's son and member of the team. I work as a tinsmith, but I've held a number of jobs throughout my life, including aviation mechanic and electronics technician on submarines. So
on subs,
I have a lot of familiarity with a bunch of different systems.
That's why we wanted tonight. Last but not least, my a Gypsy's Kiss partner.
And hello, everybody. I'm Shelley Carney with a Gypsy's Kiss, and I have my own channel, The Softer Side, and Toby and I will be doing a live show there tomorrow, Thursday, 7 o'clock, and I hope you'll tune in.
Yeah, it'll be a lot of fun. Okay, so here, let me preface all of this to the audience about what I want to accomplish tonight. So you guys all know, you in the audience all know, that I'm a big fan of technology and that we use technology whenever we can. And somewhere along the line, along this search, there's been at least conversation, if not disagreement, about whether or not technology can actually help you in the search. There was a response that Fenn gave a couple of years ago that advised people that there was a lot of things in terms of research that probably wouldn't help them, but in that big list of areas of research that he gave to that journalist, he included drones. And you and I, for any of you who saw our show on Tuesday, you know that we use drones in an interesting way. Not necessarily, I said, it may not necessarily help you find the treasure, but it certainly is a tool to give you a better better understanding of the battle space, not battle space, for gosh sakes, the search area, although that's how it's used in the military. So so it gives you a better sense of the search area because of what the altitude is versus, you know, Google Earth and versus boots on the ground. But that's just one technology. And as I mentioned in that show, and I'm going to ask Matt to talk about in just a bit, technologies that help in terms of treasure hunting and treasure searches are rapidly evolving. And there is the possibility that one day one of these technologies is going to help someone find the treasure. But from my perspective, I also believe there's a possibility that one of these technologies may help someone discover the treasure even though they may not have been looking for it. So I'm going to go back to what Fenn said. He mentioned way back when that he didn't think drones were going to be helpful. And then recently, and I'm going to transition over to this page right now, he answered a question on mysterious writings, and I have to go to it so that I can read it. It's not big enough in front of my screen right now, so I'm going to go there. It was a featured question on Jenny Kyle's Mysterious Writings, and it was July 28th, 2018. And I'm going to read this verbatim, and I'm going to ask you to forgive both me and the writer. It sounds like the writer of the question was an ESL, English as a Second Language person. So I'm going to read it verbatim as they wrote it, and then I'm going to read Fenn's answer to you. It says, "Dear Forrest, when you hide the chest you most like was not aware about how fast modern technologies will be developed and become available to many searchers. For example, they have now remotely controllable drones with high-resolution cameras. In nearest future, treasure searchers will have possibility to use drones with distant metal detector radars that can fly over a big area and detect all metal objects on the surface. My question is, will these modern devices, drones with cameras and metal detectors, provide more advantages to high-tech searchers in comparison with the traditional searchers, simple hiker, open parentheses, simple hikers that just visit each place personally, close parentheses. Sincerely, Natalia." I guess we could assume that she's perhaps Russian or Eastern European. Fenn responds, quote, "I have no doubt that they will, Natalia," unquote, and signs it with his traditional Forrest Fenn simple letter. So it sounded to me like Fenn had at last finally accepted the possibility that drones, because that's the question that she asked, but perhaps other technologies could help in the search. And maybe we don't even know at this point what those technologies are. So I'd like to share a second article with you, and I've got a transition here so you can see it. Just give me a second. And this was an article that was part of CBS This Morning. The article had actually appeared before this, but it's an article about a Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute research ship that was actually in the process of mapping the floor of the ocean. That's all they were doing. They were building a more detailed map of the floor of the ocean using side-ranging radar and Lidar. And this equipment was on what they referred to as a robotic submarine that was being dragged behind the much larger research ship. And at some point there was the responsibility for someone to be in the control center at all times while this was taking place, because it's just mapping. You know, you basically set GPS coordinates and directions automatically and put it into automatic mode. The ship follows a certain path that's designed for this particular mapping segment, and then somebody stays overnight in the control room to watch the monitors and make sure everything is going okay. Had it not been for that, had it not been for somebody there watching those monitors, they would have passed over, although I'm sure afterwards they would have looked at the data and seen the difference in the floor point, because there were all these cannons literally laying around the floor. But there was someone looking at that monitor at that time and realized what he had seen and reported it to the right up the chain of command. Okay, so they effectively stumbled over, because they were doing something completely different. They were not looking for a treasure ship. They weren't looking for what turns out to be one of the biggest sunken treasures in history, this Spanish galleon that was going from Colombia to Spain. And as a matter of fact, Colombia and Spain are now fighting over the ownership of the material on this ship. They weren't looking for treasure. They were doing the mundane and perhaps even boring job of mapping the floor of the ocean. And so effectively they stumbled over this treasure, and they stumbled over it because they were using technology to do something that 20 years ago could not have been done. Even 20 years ago, mapping the floor of the ocean was significantly more difficult than it is today because of the robotics, because of side-ranging radar, because of Lidar and things like that. So that technology changed the rules of how they did things and led to stumbling over this treasure. So here's what I want to talk about tonight. Number one, Fenn is finally considering the possibility that some of the, at least in this case, I'm not saying he's had some big sort of Vulcan mind meld and decided technology was the only way, but he's certainly considering the possibility that some of these advanced technologies that he may not have considered before this may be able to help a searcher. So that's the first thing I want to talk about. The second thing that I want to talk about is, if those technologies exist, then how would they help the searcher? And the third thing that I want to talk about is whether or not some of these technologies could enable a searcher to, quote, could enable an average person using these technologies, perhaps even for another reason, surface mapping of a canyon, for example, to possibly stumble over the treasure. And finally, I'm going to make a statement to the chat room right now that I would like your opinion on, right? Because this is the point that I'm getting to. You don't have to get there. This is my opinion. I'll qualify it with that. But it is my opinion that it is more likely that the treasure will be discovered accidentally as a result of evolving technology than it will by mastering the poem. That's my opinion. And we don't necessarily have to get there tonight. All right? So that's where we're at. That's what I want to talk about. And I think, Matt, I'm going to start with you. What, in your opinion, are the kinds of technologies that are evolving fast enough that could help any treasure hunter search for any treasure?
Well, for any treasure, that opens up quite a bit, like you already alluded to. You know, even for just the level that we're seeing for, you know, professional fishermen, for example, with side scan imaging and down scan imaging now, for a couple $1,000s, you can get an amazing sonar system from Lowrance or from Humminbird or one of those companies that it literally looks like you're taking a picture of the bottom of the lake, even at 250 feet. So that technology is evolving rapidly, and I can see in just in the case that you had mentioned with them finally finding that Spanish galleon, that seems very plausible and like something that would happen again and again in the future. I mean, they certainly have magnetometers that they drag behind the boat. I'm sure Jason will talk about that too. Magnetometers that they drag behind the boats and so forth that can certainly sense metals. But as you know, with a magnetometer, it's looking for things that are magnetic, and bronze and gold and such are not. So it's not going to help in that regard. I think the evolving technologies with better, you know, like MineLab makes some amazing metal detectors that, you know, using pulse induction technology is certainly, you know, reaching further and further down and has better capabilities even in highly mineralized ground. And I suspect that where this treasure is may have some mining going on, you know, hence the, you know, treasures new and old and so forth. It may be a place where it's got heavy iron deposits as well, you know, the Homer Brown, who knows, that might have something to do with iron oxide. But so I think that technology is developing rapidly, and I think that may help the searchers to some degree. I think Fenn alluded to, somebody asked a question along those lines about a metal detector helping the search, and he said, I'm roughly quoting here, I think he said, if you know exactly where to put that metal detector or where to put it, which also indicates to me that it may be above ground level, you know, if you know where to put it. So those are the things, and probably the biggest, I think the biggest hope would be through Lidar. Not necessarily in mapping and finding a specific shape, because this is going to be a pretty small shape, although that's not impossible. But maybe in the refractivity of bronze, for example, maybe I know that they can tell signatures, reflections back on the laser from, and they can tell whether it's vegetation, for example, versus hard rock, so that they can go over an area and say, remove all the vegetation from the returns so we can see what's underneath the vegetation. So in that case, what they're doing is they're getting a different reflection back with a laser, and then they can say, for all of those, whatever that nanometer of light range is, take it out. And then they're left with what's underneath, even in the densest jungles. So that kind of technology, I think, holds the greatest promise in helping you find this chest.
Jason, what kind of technologies, and I'm also going to ask you in the context of the time that you spent in subs, remind me again when you were there, and then kind of see if you can tell us the technologies then versus what we have available to us now, and whether or not there was some transitional event that caused us to make that available to us.
So the first thing I want to say is that more in just general comment on this concept. I think we're still maybe a decade to 2 decades away from somebody being able to pay for something that will let them, with not a lot of knowledge, go and find it using that technology. So while the abilities have increased, and there's certainly new ways to go about this search, most of these technologies are in their infancy, and honestly, they're not really meant for the kind of search. I mean, when you're talking about the entire Rocky Range, you're still left with having to get yourself in the right area using your wits and the poem and the clues. So I just want to say that at the outset. Now
I'm going to argue with you about that, by the way. But,
okay,
but go ahead and finish your point.
Well, bring it on. Bring it on. As far as my time in the silent service, I could tell you, but then I'd have to kill you.
Yeah, of course.
No, I'm just kidding. So essentially, the technologies have not changed that much. And it's really interesting because although it's promising what they're talking about, the technologies actually don't cross over because of the density of water. What they're using is, something that you can take advantage of with the density of water, with sound, with radar, things like that. But we really don't have an equivalent through the atmosphere, at least to any real depth, to see things. And even then, what they're taking advantage of, for example, with the find of the Spanish galleon, is that the sea bottom is basically flat. And if you have something like a large wreckage or even a small wreckage, I mean, they've discovered U-boat wreckages using similar technology, and that's a fairly small craft. But when you have an absolutely table flat area for that to stick up against, then now you have the opportunity to discover something. And what's important to note is that a lot of these technologies, even for what they're using, if you're not a trained technician, if it was you or I just sitting over his shoulder, you wouldn't know cannons from a reef, from whales humping. I mean, there's just no way to tell. So
boom, there goes my monetization right there.
Sorry.
Okay.
So I love whales. I think they're great.
He said humpback whales.
Okay,
that's right.
Humpback whales.
Yeah, we were in Cabo San Lucas and we did see some humpbacks. So
yeah,
that's
nice.
Right. So you asked what's the difference in the technology today, given when I was in the early 90s. The core technologies are no different. The resolution has increased somewhat, but what has really, really increased is the computer processing of that information coming in. Because now you can essentially network multiple nodes where you're taking in fairly simple information, but the computer can now say, this one's this far away from the ship and at this angle, this is at this far away and at this angle. And what you end up seeing is a three-dimensional image that looks like somebody was down there with a Nikon. The core technologies to create that, again, if we were looking over their shoulder, we wouldn't know. The technicians will recognize it, but it's the computer processing of that information that allows it to be the finds that they are. And it's super interesting that all this is coming up this way, because it actually just came out that we actually have 2 nuclear subs that we have to keep an eye on. They're at depths that are actually beyond what most people can reach. And the finding of the Titanic, like this galleon, had nothing to do with the search for the Titanic. Right. That was a cover story that the Navy came up with. They were actually paying that guy to go and check to see if he could get down to the depths where he could check on the Thresher and the Scorpion.
Oh, in order to check if they're...
that the Soviets would beat us to it, and then what are they going to do with the wreckage? Because there's still 2 reactors down there,
right.
And maybe other things. But so they run into the same issue, which is essentially, it's the same thing Fenn has, which is, at what point does the technology outstrip my ability to do this?
To hide my treasure.
And right. And what you have to ask yourself is, would he rethink or consider changing or covering or doing something else as he understood the technology was building? And in his mind, he might be able to justify that by saying,
wait a minute, let me ask you. So you're talking about when he originally hid the treasure, if he had considered the potential for technology,
no,
he might have done something different?
I mean, that's true, but I think the really interesting question is he wily enough and interested enough in keeping this going that he might respond to what he becomes aware of as technological ability? So, for example, if he finds out that Lidar is good to 3 feet in a passing drone now, and he knows the treasure is at X depth, would he consider, well, maybe I need to go and put it down a little deeper or something, and stave it off another decade or whatever?
Yeah.
There's a part of him that was kind of hoping this thing was going to go on for 10,000 years. So you really have to wonder if he hadn't thought this thing through enough to protect himself from these kind of innovations. As a pilot, with his background as a pilot, that requires such a breadth of information, of knowledge, and of science, that I find it unlikely that he didn't at least consider the possibility that somebody wasn't just going to noodle the poem and walk up on this.
So let me give an example of how I feel about this stuff to both of you, to see how you feel about it. So I bought my first drone in 2012. It was a DJI Phantom 1. It had no GPS coordination. That means you couldn't, if you didn't know how to fly it, it wouldn't fly, basically, right? You had to know how to fly that drone in order to keep it stable, and any gust of wind. It was unstable, right? That was right. 2012. I just, this year, 2018, 6 years later, bought a drone that was smaller, more powerful, more capable, had more sensors, and had a microprocessor in it that was so fast and so smart that it corrects on its own any potential cause of instability. It can stay in one location so well and manage the camera associated with it so well that it looks like you're shooting from a stable firm platform. Yep. That's what's happened in 6 years. As the microprocessors got smaller and the ability to put these kinds of application programs in them got better. So now, and so let me expand upon that for just a moment. Now, although I can't afford it, as I mentioned earlier in my introduction, 10 years ago, if I was doing a Lidar search for a temple in Mexico, in central Mexico, I would have to lease. I couldn't buy a Lidar system. I would have to lease it, and then I would have to lease the aircraft that could handle carrying that massive system in order to perform the Lidar. And it would cost me literally thousands of dollars an hour to do that. Right now, I can go to the internet and I can buy a drone that has a Lidar system on it with two control units, ground stations, that gives me full Lidar capability within the extent of whatever the battery is. And it's a 45-minute battery on the drone. And I can buy that for $50,000 to $80,000. Now, I am not suggesting that any searcher should go out right now and buy a $50,000 to $80,000 drone. My point is that 8 years ago, I had to learn how to use this technology. I had to learn how to fly it. And the only thing that's happened in the intervening 8 years is it's gotten smaller, cheaper, and easier to fly. That happens to all technology. Lidar. If you buy Lidar on a $50,000 drone, you're not going to need a technical crew of 5 people to operate that Lidar. All technology eventually reduces down in terms of cost and size and capability, and what they program into it is all that stuff that the technicians had to know, right? So now I can fly a drone with the greatest of ease simply because the software in that drone is making up for my inability to handle that drone perfectly. So what are the chances, Matt, I'll go back to you, what are the chances that the technologies that we think of as distant today will be in 5 or 10 or 20 years available to the average person in order to help them? And it doesn't have to be a treasure hunt. It could be anything. I mean, there's folks using Lidar now on drones in Mexico doing what aircraft were doing 10 years ago, and that is searching for these prehistoric Aztec and Mayan sites. So
and they're finding them.
Yeah.
And they absolutely are finding them. And, you know, the Lost City of the Monkey God, which is, you know, one of Forrest's favorite authors, but, you know, Douglas Preston just published that book, and it's on the New York Seller's Best list. And he talks about specifically the Cessna Skymaster that they used, and it was, you know, $1,000 an hour to operate that, and it only had about 350,000 pulses per second for that. Now you can get drones for, like you said, around 50 grand with 750,000 pulses a second.
Right. So that
will that help? Maybe, maybe not. I mean, you can get down to centimeter level accuracy now with the mapping. Now you have to actually, once you have this point cloud data, then you have to have a really beefy system to render it into a 3D model as well, and which all costs money and a lot of expertise to make it. But to your point, within just a few years, that technology has grown and revolutionized, and now, for example, I can do 3D rendering for free on a Linux system that, you know, otherwise would cost me a couple $100 a month in subscription fees, in addition to you know, having you know, the beefy software and so forth and hardware to run it. I think that it's without a doubt that one of these technologies that's in the near future could really help in the search. But I'm gonna go along with Jason here as well and say that if I don't know the first spot to look, if I don't have that first clue figured out or pretty close to it, that's the Rocky Mountain range is still pretty darn big.
Agreed.
And I can have that, but there has already been, and you can buy access to Lidar mappings of some of the treasure states right now. They're available. Now, do they have that kind of resolution? And is the angle going to be right so that you could pick out a 10 by 10 by 6 chest? Maybe, maybe not. I believe Forrest said that the treasure chest was subject to be scorched in it could be scorched in a fire. It was subject to rain and all of the elements. So I'm assuming that means it's not fully covered up, right?
Not buried.
And if it could be scorched in a fire, that means I think that means it's not in buried in the ground such that the top is exposed and not this, because I don't think it could be scorched in that way. So
Yeah.
there you go.
Jason, so I know you indicated that you thought maybe the advances in technology were not rapid enough to be able to help, but we know that they are advancing at a much more rapid pace than any of us expected. If you had told me 5 years ago I could hold a drone in my hand with the capability of the Mavic Air and make me as good a pilot as I've ever imagined I could be, drone pilot, I wouldn't have believed you. So the question is, when
I find that hard to believe from a guy who built his entire life off of Moore's law and an industry based on it.
yeah, true.
You know exactly where this stuff goes and how quickly it builds and how quickly it propagates. But speaking to the drone technology, I mean, that's an excellent example. But what all of that technology has been focused on is essentially letting any bumbling fool operate a drone in a way where they're not scaring local children at the park or injuring themselves or their equipment the first time they take it out.
Right.
All of that technology and most of the new sensing essentially keeps it out of running into things.
That's right.
Tree branches, rocks, what have you. I think I saw a video where a guy wanted a shot going through a little tube, kind of underneath a road where there was water. The drone was happy above the water, kept auto surfaced above it, but it would not go into that pipe. And at some point he realized it was below the threshold of what the drone would allow itself to safely consider its perimeter,
Yeah.
So yeah, I agree with you. Those technologies have grown and they've grown quickly, but for us as searchers, big deal.
All right.
Okay, so it keeps it out of the trees, but which trees? Where? And the truth is, if I took your drone, your brand new DJI down, we went down to T-Wex Park, and I took a quarter out of my pocket and I chucked it randomly into the middle of the field out there and said, find it with your DJI, we could be there all freaking day. And you watched me throw it. When you consider the actual resolution, the capabilities, yeah, you're thinking about it, because I know you. You're already ready to take on the challenge. Hell, that might make a good show.
Yeah,
But do you see what I'm saying? Is the resolution and the coverage, while the ability to pilot them safely and well has improved. I agree with you.
Mm-hmm.
The ability for them to return safely, even when they lose signal, using GPS coordinates and preloaded tracks. The ability of them to send those tracks to your home computer so you can have some hope of tracking it back down and recovering these things. Those have all improved. But the ability to find an object that you're not even sure where it is, there has been no increase in any technology that supports that, except for on the high end, like the Lidar, like Matt was talking about. And it's interesting that you guys bring up the Mayan, the Central American ruins, because the last major find of a huge site was done by a kid, and he mathed it out. He was a huge fan of Mayan culture. He figured out how they set up their roads, and they used a system with distances and angles, and he essentially found that there was a space where there should be a city, but no one had ever found a city.
Right.
And he went on Google and mapped it out and told them, go there. And then they went and verified his find. So
they mimicked the stars is what they did. They mimicked the stars. Every major city was aligned with a constellation. So the kid theorized that there had to be one in this location because of the fact that every major constellation had a major city. And there was not one discovered there, and lo and behold, there was.
All right, so
that's absolutely true.
Let's go back to Matt's comment about you still have to know where to start, you still have to know how to follow the clues, etc., right? So I'm going to use the little girl in India.
She's back.
She's back. Because the little girl in India apparently knows where to start, right? if she has a map and the poem, she can figure out where to start. So if I could imitate what the little girl in India has done, or has the potential to do, not that she's done any of this, but let's say I could imitate what the little girl in India has done, and find that intersection between warm waters halting and canyon downing, I have a starting point without going any further. And my sense is that using some of these technologies, I could cover a great deal more area with the technologies than I could simply by tramping around in the grass looking for homes of brown and places for the meek and et cetera, et cetera. So I've got a starting point, Matt. How can I get from the starting point to the treasure using these technologies?
Well, I think to follow up on your point a little bit about the little girl in India, there was a quote from Fenn where he says, "I don't think she could get past the first couple of clues."
Right.
Right. And then you also hear him say that they figured out the first treasure, but they didn't know that they had figured out the first two clues, and then they walked right past the treasure chest. So that says to me, that logic says that it's the home of brown that you can't see from a satellite image.
Or anything else, unless you're on top of it. But I would like
Right.
to make a point about that statement. The
Right.
statement that there have been people within 200 feet of the treasure, but they didn't know it. So effectively, they stumbled into, they didn't know that they were following the clues. They stumbled into that 200-foot range. What if they
or they didn't see the home of brown, so they were following it and they went too far to walk, right?
Yeah.
They had their area, they found that, and then they were looking for the home of brown and missed it.
He said they continued on. They just went
Right.
on. Yeah. So the question is, at what point does stumbling on something have value?
Okay, so if I'm using technology, let's say, and I have Lidar, and I'm, for whatever reason, scanning an area, and when I remove all the vegetation returns, for whatever reason I'd be doing that accidentally, let's say that I saw a square or rectangular object on the ground. I'm probably not going to follow up on it. I've thought, well, somebody left a wood box out there. I can't tell what it's made of based upon that, most likely. So what, I don't know how that would happen to be, unless I'm boots on the ground and then I say, well, I'm going to go check out what that routine was, but that's after the computer has rendered a 3D model and so forth and so on. So I think it could help a searcher that's actually looking for it. And you let's say you got the first two clues right, and then you use the drone. It doesn't even have to be with Lidar at that point. Maybe you use the drone to help you find the home of brown that you can't see unless you're boots on the ground. But it could be up the side of a hill. It could be, down the hill or something like that. And instead of having to walk to all of those places, I can zip a drone over there to see if I can find a home of brown that's not visible from a satellite, assuming I can get down through the trees and all that other stuff.
All right. So Jason, I'm gonna before go ahead. I do want to go to the room and get some questions out of the room, but go ahead and say what you're going to say, because I'm going to create a scenario for you afterwards that I want you to think about. But go ahead and say what you're going to say. Yeah.
All right. So a couple things. One thing is, it leads you into a very strange place. I agree with what Matt said, but it really made you think. As soon as you start saying, so then maybe go see someplace that you couldn't necessarily get to. But as soon as you start saying that, then you have to go back to what Fenn has cautioned all of us, which is it's something that he could get to, right? It's something that and he got to on numerous occasions, apparently. And he was on years and able to safely negotiate whatever it took to do that. So essentially, the danger is the technology could open your search up and actually increase the areas you're looking at, because it can reach further out than what he would have. You could be looking up a hillside that he would have never crossed up and gone up into. just because it looks damned interesting and it matches what you think your poem is telling you. And that's a wasted afternoon and you know, and drone time. So I think it's just really I hear what you're saying, and I think technology can always be useful as a tool, as a force multiplier. But you can't ignore your givens, right? Your givens are that at older, you know, older on in age, he safely negotiated this numerous times with a heavy weight. So as soon as you start talking about, well, let's send the drone, you know, up. Ooh, look at that cavern up there. There's no way we'll crawl up there, but hell, send the drone up. Well, as soon as you start talking about things like that, you're essentially going past what would have been his reach, using the technology to do that.
Right.
And that's where I think that the danger could be, the little bit of the Pandora's box situation on it. That's the first thing. And the second thing is, honestly, if somebody ends up using technology to find it that way, I just think it's just not cricket, you know. Like there's so many people have worked so hard on this poem and on this search and put so much time into it that as much as, you know, I guess everybody, you know, who's going to fault them, you know, to find that treasure, who's going to fault them? But if it goes down that way, I will put it out there that I'm not going to be pleased. It's going to be a disappointing day to hear that somebody who, you know, let's put it this way. What if what if that technology comes out? Okay. Kid goes down to, goes on to Amazon, orders it because he can afford to, goes out on his first run because he's been looking at the blogs and he has an idea of where to go. And he uses this technology, which whatever it is able to essentially check out a valley at a time as he cruises a drone over on a and he nails it and he goes down and he collects it. That's going to be somewhat frustrating. Did
you not refer to it as a force multiplier, though? That effectively is what it's designed to do.
I can understand somebody wanting to propagate the technology in that sense, but what I'm saying is that, first off, I don't think we're there, and I don't think we're anywhere near there. I think it's going to be at least a couple decades before somebody literally come out of pocket without spending the kind of money that would kind of, you know, it's like the guys going after these sunken treasures, but they're blowing $1.5 million on the operation and paying for the ship and the crew and everything. It's like, well, you better find the treasure, you know. And I'm not saying you got to spend that kind of money, but you know, Lidar is still pretty high up there, and the technology isn't necessarily where it needs to be to find this thing.
Moore's law. Okay, so here's let me create a hypothetical device for you, and then I want you to think about it and see whether or not A, it's a force multiplier, and B, I have the right to pursue it, use it in pursuit of the treasure. So here's what I can buy: a drone with a high resolution visual visual imaging camera, right? And I can get that for $30,000 today. All right. I can also buy a drone with a high sensitivity infrared camera, and I can get that for around $20,000. So visual imaging, right? Visible light imaging, infrared imaging. I can buy another drone with Lidar imaging for around $50,000 to $80,000. Here's what I'd like to discuss with you as soon as I take questions from the room, and that is, since all three of those technologies exist in a form that an average person with an interest could purchase, how soon will I be able to purchase a drone with infrared, visible light, and laser light imaging capabilities into an onboard processor, giving me a finished image on my transmitter, on my receiver transmitter? Both of you think about that for just a second. Let's go into the room and see if we have any questions. Shelley?
Okay. Let me just go over a few things that have come up in the room. And Sledneck says, my drone kept me from climbing a dangerously rotten tree. I consider that a big help. And no one in particular says, I don't think it's anywhere dangerous either, but boy, if that could prevent a searcher from risking their lives, that would be wonderful.
Mhm.
Let's see. David Kramer suggests instead of these kinds of technology, we get a bronze sniffing dog. Mary Green and a few other people also said, Mary Green and Fenn Treasure Hunters both say the drone doesn't matter if you don't know where warm water's Halt.
Agreed.
William Ortiz has a question for you. Did you do a test flight with your drone using thermal, and what were the results?
William, the short answer is no, I haven't. And the reason is that the particular drone I have and the particular infrared sensor I have are not designed for one another. I need a larger drone in order to comfortably carry the weight of the sensor. I was hoping that it wouldn't be that way, but unfortunately it's not. It's just not, the drone that I have isn't powerful enough to give me as much time as I need, and it makes it very unstable. So I haven't actually done that yet.
And Lori James has a question for the panel. Would bronze give a specific signal?
Okay, so let me take a shot at that first, and then Matt and Jason, I want you to go. So there, you can actually tune the various imaging sensors to respond to various versions of spectra, right? So you can actually tune it to respond to a color, a temperature, as Matt said something earlier, a dimension, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not the nature necessarily of bronze to do it, but bronze gives off all these signatures from heat to color to density to metallicness, et cetera, et cetera. So you can actually program these devices to respond to that particular signature. Matt, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I think you're right on, and I think that that's probably one of the most hopeful avenues that we could go down, because bronze is particularly hard to photograph, right? We know that that's one of the key courses that you have to take when you're becoming a photographer, is how to photograph bronze because of the blaze that it throws when you have any light on it at all.
Yeah.
In fact, they make products to dull that. Like a wax to put over a statue or a bronze figurine.
That's right.
So I think that is definitely a very hopeful thing, and something that part may not be that far out in the future, and being able to figure out the specific type of bronze and we know it's a Romanesque chest, so we could probably figure out the components, and then using technology like for example, a mass spectrometer. That's how it works. It looks at the reflection or the refractivity of a given substance, so we can break it down. So we could figure out what the refractive properties are of this particular bronze, and then we could use lasers or some sort of it would probably be a laser, but be shooting a laser and looking for that signature return, I think, has the best possibilities in that regard.
Jason, do you want to add to that?
Well, going to the example that you said, if somehow we had the processing, which is actually very similar to what I was describing with the evolution of the processing that goes on along on board submarines, is that I would go back to the same thing, which is the core technologies that you're using aren't at a level that could feed that processing to get the result that you're talking about. And maybe it is only a few years off, but I think the ability to process that information on the same machine will come much sooner than the ability of those core technologies like the Lidar, like the infrared band. That's a surface temperature measurement. If it's line of sight. If you can see it, then that's the temperature you're measuring. So as soon as you consider any kind of brush cover, slight burial, inside a cave, whatever, then essentially you've knocked that one out right off the bat. And that leaves you visual band and Lidar. And Lidar, it's not like running a vacuum cleaner over the rug and you pull up everything that's loose. You're tuning it for a specific set of situations and density and everything. So the concept of going over a rolling valley with, you know, peaks and crags and vegetation and all this other stuff, and just being able to make a nice gentle pass and pick up all this, you know, relative information, that I think is just much further off than what we'd have to be concerned about.
All right, let's go back to the room. If you have any more questions, take care of those, and then we'll finish up with the question that I asked Jason.
Okay. We had a little bit of a back and forth discussing whether or not it would be fair to use technology to find the treasure when we're instructed to use the poem to find the treasure. Yeah. We have people on both sides of that question. And let's see. John Tax says the scanning tech to differentiate between various materials will greatly increase, but the scanning area size will still remain fairly small. You'll still need a reduced search area. Let's see. Fox Gaming brings up a good point. Are drones legal to operate in the special place?
Well, that of course is a question we don't have an answer to because we don't know what the special place is. We do know that drones are legal to operate in national forests and BLM land. Not legal, as I found out, to operate on tribal land, and not legal over national parks or other national anything that's in the National Park Service. I think there's 21 different categories.
I think that question has been answered for us, which is I would say that they are legal, because if they weren't and he knew that, I think he would have given one of his wry answers like, I don't have to worry about that, little lady.
Right. Yeah.
You know, and he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't, which means he has considered it and he does think it's possible.
Oh, that's an interesting perspective. I hadn't thought about it from that angle. Okay, let me go back to Jason with the question that I had. I've got how soon can I take the drone technologies combined with LiDAR, infrared, visible light, and put it all together in one drone that I can get for $20,000?
Are you posing that to me, or
no? Let me start with Jason. I'll come back to you, Matt.
Okay.
I'm sorry. One more thing. And all of it for 20K, and the onboard processing capability to transmit an image down to my ground station.
Yeah. Well, I think the bandwidth and the processing is already there to support that. The onboard processing would definitely require some new equipment, but honestly, nothing more than what a red camera requires to run it. Yeah. You know, as far as just the sheer processing, 20K, I'd say we're still like a decade off to put all of that on one machine.
A decade?
Yeah. And the other thing I would throw out there is, what's your flight time? What's your flight time on your DJI?
Well, my current flight time is 17 to 20 minutes. But
20 minutes.
But
20 short minutes.
I have a battery that big.
Yeah.
Right? So if I can put a battery that big on my drone, then I'm going to get a lot more flight time out of it.
Yeah, but once you put all that equipment on there, you're also increasing your payload and thereby increasing the size of your motor. So you're
all right. So maybe the question is, how soon will I be able to buy a military class drone for $20,000?
Woo!
Because they have all that, right?
Well, let's hear Matt's side of it.
Okay, Matt, how soon will I be able to buy a drone with visible light, infrared light, LiDAR, and the onboard processing power to transmit a finished image to my ground station?
Well, let me start by saying the current state, I can do right now, I can do the visible light and the infrared together.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that comes across as an image that I can see in real time on my handheld with my Unique. My big Unique, which is a 920 millimeters between engines, runs on 3 of these guys at the same time. And I can get up to 45 minutes on that particular drone. So that can happen. Now, the gotcha, the fly in the ointment, so to speak, is that processing power on board and to render a picture that's transmitted to me in real time, that's what I think is going to be interesting. Because like I said, we're at 750,000 pulses per second. And with that, we can get down to between 3 and 5 centimeters of accuracy, even in the Z axis,
right.
which, X, Y, and then Z would be up and down.
Right.
To detect a chest that's 10 by 10 by 6 or 5, whichever, I've heard both. I'm thinking you're going to need to have at least that 750,000 pulses of light per second. That's 750,000 pieces of data in a point cloud per second.
All right.
When you fly for 45 minutes, that's a lot.
Okay, so let me make one change to it. I don't have to. I've got a basic image that comes down to my ground station, but I'm storing all the raw data on board on a some sort of hard drive, soft drive, whatever. It doesn't have to be transmitted.
Well, I can tell you at 4K
Yeah.
resolution, a 512 gig on the DJI Inspire 2 will last you about 20 minutes.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, and those aren't cheap either.
Yeah.
So to answer your question, to be able to process that in real time, I think we're still 15 years off on that.
So Jason says at least 10, you say at least 15.
Yeah, because
so I
of
will
that
be
processing.
either 79
He's already doing the math.
or 84. Jesus Christ, I'll be when the age that Fenn was. Okay,
Wow.
we got to start closing up shop here. I wanted to cover some more of this, but one last question, just make it. You can spend as much time. We'll go over a little bit if we have to. And the question is, what with technology or not? Actually, two questions. What do you think the probability? What do you think of the probability that someone stumbles over the treasure in two conditions? Probabilities for both these conditions, without technology and with a technological advantage. Matt? The probability that someone will stumble over the treasure without technology, pure, I just happened to be hiking and I tripped, and with a technological advantage.
I don't think Fenn made his statement about somebody is not going to trip over this thing by accident. I think he tested that. I think he tested it for several years.
Yeah.
I think he put something out there to see that that's the case.
Uh-huh.
So I think the chances of somebody tripping over it are pretty darn slim.
So let's
based upon how big the sun.
0 to 10%.
Yeah,
Not even that high.
So, yeah, maybe 5%.
Okay. What about with
Yeah.
technology? With a technological advantage.
6%.
Okay. Jason?
So I agree with Matt. I think he made it very clear. And I think that it was actually his outdoor knowledge that told him that because of the specific circumstance he was in, he looked at that spot and realized, had I not had what happened to me, I don't think anybody would have laid eyes on this spot for how long did he want it hidden? 10,000 years? It's funny, if you look at a modern life, there's a bunch of us out here, but we essentially all go across the same paths constantly.
Mm-hmm.
We're not breaking away from those trails,
Right.
Even when you're in a park, right? You're staying on hiking trails. I think the chances of somebody randomly coming across it without tech is infinitesimally small, and I think the chances of them using tech to randomly come across it is just a notch higher.
So
because
you and Matt
I
agree?
still think the tech is focused enough that you essentially would have to be you would have to still stumble across it. You're essentially saying, like, well, what if somebody's close enough that they're taking a selfie and they go, what the hell is that in the background? Oh, the bronze chest. It turns out people were looking for this bastard. So I think it's just not going to be a factor.
All right. Okay.
On that level. Now you start talking about the device you're talking about and everything, then
Maybe.
maybe
You're
someday
just at this point you're just trying to give the old man some hope. Is that what you're doing here?
You know that, and I do want to say that although I will be disappointed if you use tech to find this thing, I will still be okay with taking my cut.
Okay.
But
All
the
right.
follow-up question, right?
Go.
I'm sure you're going to hit me with the follow-up question. Now, if you're a searcher and you've narrowed down these spots, excuse me, you've narrowed down these spots. Now, what do I think the chances are that you could use technology and find the chest? I think that's a lot higher. Now,
Yeah.
I think you have the combination of knowing what you're looking for, and personally, what I'm thinking is what I'm using that drone for is to help me quickly go through an area, not necessarily to an area that I don't think Finn could have gotten to, but just get there and say I have 50 places where I think warm waters halt. I could check out several of them in a day using a drone if I can fly in those areas, because I know that, well, I think I'm looking for the Homer Brown with that drone.
Right.
And I'm looking for the Homer Brown in some place that I can't see it with, from a satellite image, because I think he said you can't get past the first couple.
Right. Yeah. That's right.
Let me
Google
ask you
Earth.
this, Matt. Given today's tech, okay, let's say you plan a recon for yourself, for your solution, and you've got it nailed down to 3 spots that you know you can hit in a day. You go hit those spots. On your drive home, would you be absolutely for damn sure that that drone covered everything? If you didn't walk it, if you use the drone to mostly do search grids and everything, on the drive home, would you literally say, I'm going to X those spots off? The drone didn't see it, therefore I wouldn't have saw it, and I'm done.
It depends on how close I could get to the ground, but the high resolution camera like that, and I can see in 720. In the case of our Mavic Air, and I have one just like Toby does, we can see that image coming down in 720p, I think, right, Toby? So with 720p and flying at a 50 to 100 feet above the ground, if that's possible in that given area, and I don't see anything that remotely looks like the Homer Brown. Yep, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, I think Matt's right, because I want to address that too. I think Matt's right. I think it's going to depend on your flight plan, altitude, your pattern, etc., and I think you could comfortably say that you could cover enough ground with a drone that you might not otherwise have covered on foot, and depending on your flight plan and your altitude, and the fact, what transmits down is 720p, but what's being recorded on that SD card is 4K. So even if I wasn't as comfortable when I left there driving home, that drive, when I got back and started processing that 4K video image, that would be something completely different. And actually, if I decided not to use video but use still images instead, a pattern of still images, time lapse, I'd get even greater resolution than the video image as well.
Or shape recognition.
Yeah, exactly.
They have facial recognition. You can also do shape recognition. You could have it scan for a square or a rectangle.
Yeah, the important thing is to get the image and then process it in the various forms once you get back to your desktop. So
So here's the thing. The treasure was placed there by a man standing at a man's height.
Yeah.
And possibly tucked away into something. Therefore, any aerial shot down into an area will never give you the angle that a person walking through, surveying an area. What if it's a crag? What if it's just like a flat rock and there's a little hole underneath that starts it, and then you look under there and you say, hey, what's that? Where essentially you need that angle, right? You need that perspective to see the spot.
And I am not disagreeing with that principle. I am not assuming that ultimately it's going to be a drone that pinpoints that treasure. In this case, I'm much more like Matt, where if I can track an area that I started at the intersection of Warm Waters, Halt, and Canyon down, and I can identify because all the other clues right up until finding the treasure, according to what he said thus far, are visible. So can I find Homa Brown? Can I identify No Place for the Meek? Can I find the No Paddle Up Your Creek? Can I use it to get me that much closer to the treasure without doing the trek? I may not necessarily be able to find that treasure, but what are the chances that I could use this technology, all the technology that I described before, to get me closer to where the treasure might be, might reside?
And the other thing that I'm hearing you guys saying is it may not just be the value of literally seeing it. It may be the value of recognizing that this isn't it.
Right. Exactly. Yeah.
The value of just saying, look, I'm not seeing the things that I need to see.
These clues. Yeah.
What I believe the clues are.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, with the technology today, I think you're absolutely right. With the technology as we have it today with our Mavic Airs, we should be looking for the Homa Brown.
Right.
And crossing things off of our list that don't have a Homa Brown that we can see, because I don't think it's going to be really, really hard to find the Homa Brown once you're 100 feet above it or 50 feet above it.
Yeah.
I don't think it's going to be that hard, but I don't think it's going to be something you can see on Google Maps because Forrest said that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I guess I'm disappointed that I'm going to be 84 years old before I have a chance at doing any of this.
Before you can take out the loan for that sucker.
Yeah, exactly. But I am happy to find out that the old guy in the room is actually the techno geek, and these guys only are stuck in their little texting machines.
Nice.
All right, let's wrap it up. Matt, say your goodbyes. Tell them where they can find you.
I'm Matt Brewer, and everybody have a great evening. I'm with Brewer Aerial Services LLC, and I'm working on building a full website for it as we speak. So.
Well, you told me that the last time, so you better get Wix, brother.
I've been doing all kinds of work, and that's one of the things on the list when you're chief and Indian and everything else in between.
Yeah. Jason Michael.
My name is Jason Hughes. I'm a tinsmith. My main website is newmexicotinwork.com. It's good to see everybody again. This is the busiest time of my year. I just had the largest show of the year, so I've been kind of out of pocket for a little while, but it's good to see familiar faces and chat and everything. And you guys be safe out there.
Well, we look forward to getting you back after our Tuesday show so we can see some more of your live streams on your tin work. It was the ones that you've done so far have been really good. Shelley Carney.
Yes, I'm Shelley Carney with The Softer Side. Please make sure to check out my channel at thesofterside.me. Toby and I will be live tomorrow evening, 7 o'clock Mountain Time. And we're going to be talking about how awesome it is to let go. So make sure you're there for that. And if you did not get a question answered this evening, make sure you put it in the comments below and Toby will get to it.
Yeah, we will. All right. And of course, I'm Toby Younis with a Gypsy's Kiss. I want to throw out a couple of things. First of all, I want to thank our panel for joining us tonight. I just love talking about this stuff, as you can tell, and I think these guys do too. And I'm glad they could make it tonight so that we could have this conversation. Make sure tomorrow you watch for Gypsy's Kiss at 1 p.m. Mountain Daylight Time for our book club, weekly book club. This is chapter 19, is it? Men with Ropes. What does help me out here, Sean?
Teachers with ropes.
Okay. Yeah. And I know it had involved ropes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, it involves ropes and teachers. Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, and also I'd like to thank our moderators in the chat room for keeping the chat room moving along very nicely. Those of you in the chat room, thank you for joining us tonight. We love to have you here. We love your questions. We love having kind of a lot of fun with this. I do want to remind you that we are trying to support Jamie Diggins in the recovery. I did upload a video today based on footage that she sent me from her cell phone showing the damage that the fire did to her house. I also posted a bunch of photographs on our blog of the same fire damage, and it looks honestly like a war zone. So if you get a chance, watch that video, take a look at the blog. It's right at the top of the blog, and I'll post links to those in the description box below. If you want to participate or contribute, all the information you need is in a Google Doc that I've posted at bit.ly/ JJ Diggins. Everything you need to know is in that doc, including the current numbers. I think we've raised $12,600+ so it's moving along very nicely. So, and again, thank you for that. And I've spoken with Jamie a couple of times in the past couple of days, and I can tell you she's very grateful. So we're doing a good thing by helping her. Okay. So again, thank you very much for watching tonight. We will see you tomorrow at 1 p.m. and have a good night. And gentlemen and young lady, thank you very much for this evening. We're transitioning to outro.